The first humans to enter North America hunted Ice Age giants. Their skill was consummate, honed at a devastating cost to humans and beasts. Their quarry was huge, wild, and deadly. The hunters were desperate. Killing was a matter of survival. No animal could hide from them for long. Hundreds of thousands of mastodons once roamed North America. Not all of them died in the hunt, but none of them remain. Where did they go? At least one may have met its end in a way that offers new answers to this very old question. The remains of one mastodon found recently in upstate New York are giving scientists new insight into how long these massive mammals lived and how they became extinct.
And we used to ice skate out there every winter. We had no idea what was down there.
Larry Logier and his brother had no idea that after more than 10,000 years, one skeleton was not buried all that deeply.
This was my parents' house when I was a kid, and we spent summers fishing and boating on the pond.
This is Larry Logier. He, his wife Cheryl, and their daughter Laura live in a suburban Hyde Park neighborhood. They never imagined that a prehistoric mystery lay buried just outside the house, beneath the family pond. In the summer of 1999, the Logiers hired a backhoe to deepen the pond for better fishing in the summer and ice skating in the winter. Sometime later, Larry discovered the backhoe had unearthed something unexpected, the leg bone of a mastodon. The bone was great news for then 5-year-old Laura. She was about to become the star of show and tell. Laura and her mom arranged to share their discovery with Laura's schoolmates.
Good morning, boys and girls. This is Mrs. Cheryl Logier, and she's brought something exciting for show and tell today.
This is a bone of an animal called a mastodon. He's between 9,000.
The children were surprised to learn that prehistoric beasts roamed the streets of what is now their town.
Oh my goodness.
Not sure what else might be buried out there, the Logiers turned to Warren Allman, director of the Paleontological Research Institution in Ithaca, New York. Allman and a handful of volunteers drained the pond. The result was a muddy mess. Once started, the heavy-duty sump pumps droned all day. But the pond filled up again at night, so the soupy, slippery mud never went away.
first, it was really slow going. Basically, we dug for an entire week and found nothing. I mean, absolutely nothing. Zip, zilch, nada.
Sloppy, watery mud was everywhere. Despite the pumps, natural springs kept the pond floor perpetually wet. But what kept the team going was the hope that the rest of the Mastodon might be buried in the muck.
Like shoveling fleas across a barnyard.
It looked to us obvious that there had to be more of this animal, because there was an upper arm bone, a lower arm bone, a piece of tusk, a piece of skull, a toe bone, and a piece of shoulder blade, and there just had to be more than that.
The crew began to take samples of mud and peat at the site, hoping to learn if there might be other prehistoric fragments, snails, shells, or vegetation hidden in the muck.
We were all more than ready to give up. I mean, we were ready to pack it in and leave. And then Elizabeth Humbert, who had just started working at PRI less than 2 weeks before as the new volunteer coordinator, found the sacrum in the mud. In that instant, everything changed.
Oh, yes, I do know. We've got a vertebrae here. This is a vertebrate. This is a piece of the backbone. This is where the nerve passes through. This is where your spinal cord passes through.
The sacrum Elizabeth found is the last bone in the spine, that part of the column that connects with the pelvis. Soon after, the crew uncovered a vertebra. Then everyone took heart.
The Logiers came home, found the bones on the top of the spoil pile, and said, "Oh my goodness, this is neat. Where did you find them?" And
Sensing there was more to come, Ullman called for help from nearby Vassar College and Cornell University, where he teaches. Students, enthusiastic despite the mud, came to work as volunteers.
So you'll see this weekend that there's a ton of other stuff here. There's not just bones. There's wood. There's, if you look carefully, you'll see beetles, you'll see sticks. We've got a 25-foot, what we think is a spruce tree down here in the bottom of the pond. There's all kinds of other stuff here, and we're trying to look at all of it. So that's why it may seem kind of arcane that we're leaving stuff where, why don't we just yank it out and go home with it? Well, we're trying to leave things in place so that we can tell a story.
You want me to get some?
Their first assignment was to uncover as many bones as possible. Their second was to avoid getting stuck.
It's so covered with mud that it's...
Meanwhile, others in the crew used an auger to probe as deep as 7 feet for samples of prehistoric material from the pond's layers of mud, marl, and peat. Each turn of the instrument helped paleontologists like Rob Ross get closer to finding the exact makeup and order of the layers below.
Probably the bottom layer in this pond is a layer of gravel. Up above that is a couple meters of this very fine clay of various colors, and then right up at the top is peat and organic-rich material. And the mastodon is found apparently at the bottom of the peat where it contacts with this upper mud layer, and some of the bones seem to have sunk down into the mud.
Wow, that is...
oh my God, 2 of them.
Articulation!
Okay, Sarah, just hold on 1 second.
Students found more of the mastodon's spinal column. They began packing the smaller bones carefully.
Some of the smaller bones that we're worried about being jostled around, we're removing. Now, we're not removing any of the larger bones. We're going to keep them in place for as long as possible.
Sarah, she needs another bag.
Toe bones and any small parts that might easily become lost during the removal of the larger bones were collected and bagged. In the process, the students removed tons of mud, all by hand.
Right there. Wonderful.
The location of each item found in the pond was carefully plotted and sketched. But the mud sometimes fooled even the experts.
This is a bone. This is a bone. Warren! Bone! All right, okay. What's it important in the world. Stop!
That's a nice gray bone there, Pete.
It's a pretty cool rock, anyway.
Actually, yeah. It's a lot of it.
Mastodons and mammoths coexisted easily in the New World. The two mammals actually lived side by side in North America for more than 2 million years. Both mastodons and mammoths originated in Africa, migrating over the next 55 million years into areas like Europe and Eurasia before entering the Americas. Mastodons were first to make their way across the Bering Land Bridge, entering North America about 15 million years ago. They were followed by Columbian mammoths and finally by woolly mammoths. Allman and his team are looking for one of a countless number of mastodons that once roamed the forests of the northeast United States.
12,000 years or so ago, upstate New York was heavily forested, and that was perfect for mastodons, who evidently ate a mixed diet of trees and softer vegetation, unlike their cousins, the mammoths, who ate a diet of tougher vegetation, rich in grasses.
At the Hyde Park site, work continued at a frenetic pace. Encouraged by what they'd found, volunteers plowed full steam ahead. A leg bone and more vertebrae are found, but one of the largest bones caught Allman by surprise.
So the pelvis is this big.
The crew has just found the mastodon's massive pelvis. It's 5 feet wide and it weighs 50 pounds.
Yes, it is, yes. See, look. Look.
Oh, wow.
Look at that.
Under Warren Allman's direction, the students collected large samples of matrix from the pond. Matrix is natural material in which prehistoric twigs, leaves, insects, bits of bones, and shells are embedded. Sample bags were sent to science classes, where students examined them for clues to the biology and geology of the pond. More than 1,000 schools and community groups participated in the project.
So here were people all over the world actually going through and finding pieces of bone, feathers in some cases, leaves, fossil beetles. So we're not only trying to do the science here, but we're trying to do a large public education project associated with it.
The Logiers also got an education. At every available opportunity, Cheryl Logier got down into the pit to help remove mud. Her husband, Larry, helped build the wooden platform and worked to stop it from sinking.
It's very educational. I never even heard of a mastodon before a year ago. And my biology teacher would probably be mad at me for saying that if she's watching the show today.
Volunteers sometimes worked in waist-high mud. Well into the dig, the mud is no longer slowing them down.
Yep. It's 1 o'clock.
Everybody's taking a break, so maybe this is a good chance to look around and see what we found. The water's down, the sludge has been removed, and we've had a really productive 2 days. So we're just going to walk around here and see what we've got. It's looking increasingly like the skeleton is, I shouldn't say complete, but it's looking pretty complete. What I've got here is a set of vertebra, pieces of the backbone. These are from what's called the thoracic region. These are the bumpy bones right between your shoulder blades up here. In a mastodon skeleton, these are spines that come off of the backbone for a kind of a hump, attachment of muscles.
In a different part of the pond, volunteers came across another important piece of the puzzle.
Look at this, 7.5 feet of tusk. What a beautiful color. The tip down there has been exposed for the first time in perhaps 12,000 years. It's awesome. It said, chills up my spine, boy. I'm telling you, it does every time I touch it.
Paul, look at the bag.
It's incredible.
Open the bag.
Yeah.
Paleontologists and volunteers have now uncovered the mastodon's scapula, leg bones, pelvis, ribs, vertebrae, and tusks. Unfortunately, the animal's skull is still missing.
Being a fossil is very difficult. Becoming a fossil is very difficult. So the chances of something being preserved at all are small. The chances of being preserved articulated and in anything resembling life position are even smaller. So we would expect that this should be disarticulated. The question is, when we put the puzzle together, when we map out where the different bones are, will we be able to get some clues to how the body fell apart?
Despite the lack of clues on this front, the crew struggling in the Logiers pond believed that more was yet to come.
Life takes place in slow motion down here.
There's a boat! A huge one!
10-year-old volunteer Nicholas DeSantis spotted something partially buried in the steep bank at the edge of the pond. Paleontologist Pete Nestor is first on the scene.
You're kidding me. You're absolutely kidding me. Oh my God. Nicholas, you're the man. What a, oh my God. Oh. There's a bone here.
Nicholas found the ulna, or foreleg, in the bank, while all other bones had been discovered inside the pond. The crew was puzzled. What's it doing here? And are there more bones out here?
Where did this come from?
They decide to leave it in place until they can get a few more answers. Then they'll dig it out.
Warren! Hey, Warren! We've got some news! Right here! This operation just got a lot more complicated.
Nicholas's momentous discovery comes as a surprise to the scientists. Now they'll have to widen the area of their search. There may be more to find in other spots outside the pond.
It was nice and easy when we thought they were all in the same place. Well, easy in a relative sense anyway.
Excited volunteers and curious spectators gathered around as Warren steps in with a plan on how to proceed.
Let's put somebody over here with a shovel just to dig around. I bet there's nothing else, but let's just put somebody over here monkeying around with a shovel and see if there's anything. If we don't find anything else, we'll just take it out.
Like all sciences, paleontology involves some luck. It was pure chance that Nicholas was even there to volunteer. He's the son of the Discovery Channel cameraman.
Is he working for anybody yet? We can use him.
I guess he is now.
Almond's decision to do some exploratory digging in the pond bank turns out to be exactly the right move. 75 feet away from Nicholas's leg bone, the crew makes an even bigger find.
That's a tooth.
Oh my God. Oh my God, it is. It is. Oh, it is. Unbelievable.
This is another one.
Unbelievable.
Look at that.
What is it? It's the teeth.
What?
We got the teeth. All right. We got 2 teeth. Baby. Wait a minute. We're looking at the bottom of the skull. We're looking at the maxilla. The skull's upside down.
Yes.
Oh man. Yes. Yes. Unbelievable.
Except for a few toe and ankle bones, Almond and nearly 300 volunteers have found almost 90% of the mastodon skeleton. It's rare to find one this complete. It would take a lot of digging to gently remove the huge upper part of the skull. Again, Cheryl Logier was one of the first in on the action. Almond estimated it would take more than a week to remove this huge bone. Still missing was the mandible, or lower jaw. Besides, there were many other cleanup jobs to finish. Sooner or later, nearly everyone got involved. Even little Laura. Her mother didn't even seem to mind all that mud. Back in the pond, Warren Almond became oblivious to the muck when he learned that volunteers had located the lower jaw.
And then we're finding a lot of these bones by feeling them first.
The jaw goes all the way down. I'm in the center now. Oh, look at that. That is complete. It's completely fused. The two halves of the jaw, of the lower jaw, are fused, which is normal in an old animal. Now I'm going up the other side here, and there are the teeth, and then I'm going up, up, and there we are at the other side. It's absolutely complete. Wow, does that feel great. Those teeth are fantastic. Those are really great. They're in great shape. This is great. Can I keep doing this all day? And put your hand down there and feel the teeth. You feel it?
Oh, yeah.
With the finding of the lower jaw, the skull is now complete.
And then there should be another tooth go this way, and you should be able to find another tooth coming this way.
Bunch.
Yeah.
And they're very boring.
Yeah. Oh, look at that.
That's so cool.
It may be time to move the bigger payload, the larger bones. The skull, too, is almost ready to come out. Almond and Nestor huddled to decide their next step.
Maybe there is a pattern here and we don't have enough experience to see it. Maybe elephants fall apart a common way. And
before we start pulling these things out, we definitely have to get someone in here to look at this. Someone that's done this before.
it could be that this is a fairly common thing. To me, it looks like it stepped on a landmine.
Allman decided to call Dan Fisher at the University of Michigan. He's one of the country's leading Mastodon experts.
When I heard from Warren Allman, I was mainly hoping that we'd find a well-preserved specimen and also one that was not too much disturbed by the prior pond excavation that had gone on at the site.
The Hyde Park find is of particular value to science because it represents an essentially complete animal, one of the most complete ever found in New York State.
That means that it acts as a sort of Rosetta Stone. That is, it gives us different things that we're interested in learning about, all in the same context. We're interested in getting information from tusks, from molars, from the bones of the animal, and here, when we have it all, we can compare the story told by each of those different parts of its anatomy.
Fisher is also an expert on the differences between the mastodon and its better-known cousin, the mammoth.
If we saw them on the landscape, we'd notice perhaps first that mammoths have more strongly curled or curved tusks, whereas mastodon tusks are somewhat more straight. Another difference is that mammoths are shorter through the torso and longer in the leg, whereas mastodons are a little longer through their body and a little shorter legged.
One of the most conspicuous differences between these mammals was their teeth.
This is the lower jaw of a mastodon. My hands here are on its jaw joint. This is its chin, and here, of course, are its teeth. This is a single wisdom tooth, and here we have the molar just in front of the wisdom tooth. These teeth have rather high cusps on their chewing surface when they first erupt. With enough wear against the upper teeth, they develop a somewhat lower profile. The surfaces of these teeth are used for shearing and crushing the twigs and leaves and so forth that make up this animal's diet. Over here, we have a lower jaw of a mammoth. Again, my hands on its jaw joint, its chin, and in this case, a single tooth. This again is a wisdom tooth. The wisdom teeth, the chewing teeth of a mammoth, wear against the upper teeth in this fashion. And the enamel ridges that comprise the chewing surface of this tooth shear against similar ridges on the upper tooth, chopping and cutting the grass that makes up this animal's diet.
Back in the pit, the crew continued salvaging the mastodon bones.
Warren,
We gotta save that.
it's funny for so many reasons.
Yeah, that's right.
We were thinking maybe they scooped us. Maybe they know there's a mammoth down there, and we just haven't found it yet.
The mastodon skull is more than 3 feet long and weighs about 200 pounds. It took the crew 10 days to dig it out of the mud. To keep the skull from falling apart, they decide to carry some of the surrounding dirt.
You run into one. I got it. A little more.
Constructing the crate was an exercise in spontaneous engineering.
Bring your hand down a little if you can. There it is, I can see it.
Put a brace across
5 hours later, the skull was lifted from its hiding place with surrounding dirt from the bank of the pond. the skull is the first part of the animal to begin the journey to a new home. Carefully, volunteers transported it across the Logiers' backyard, to a flatbed trailer, and eventually to the Paleontological Research Institution's newly planned Museum of the Earth in Ithaca, New York.
We want more weight towards the front.
Hold on. Hold it steady. Straight down? Straight down.
Meanwhile, Fisher supervises the documentation and removal of the remaining jumble of bones. Already, he has learned something from them.
This Hyde Park mastodon was probably in its early 30s at the time of its death. It seems to have been a male. We don't know yet much about its state of health at the time of its death, though we will be learning such things when we analyze the animal's tusk.
Scientists have also already learned enough to suspect that the Logiers' backyard was probably a swamp when the mastodon died. Over the millennia, the body was pulled down by gravity, pushed around by moving water, and buried in silt as it sank into lower layers of clay and marl.
Surface facing up into...
Fisher and his crew continued to painstakingly document every piece of the skeleton they removed from the pond.
Okay, here's something. Joint surface pristine.
The process would take nearly a week.
Ready for another? Yep. 354, which is L2, articulated with L3. So once they're out, they come apart.
And to do that safely, I think we have to free what's all around the angle.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, this is a left fourth rib.
Wow.
And that's going to be one of the more massive ones.
So what number is that? Oh, I see.
359.
Left fourth rib, okay.
So I guess you need my chart, right?
Okay, up she comes. That's it. The water is draining out of the foramina there.
Oh, boy.
I got it. I got it.
The tusk is carried out in its own custom-made case.
We'll keep our end up. Lift our end up.
Cheryl Logier removed the last of the mastodon bones and carried it from her own backyard into the annals of science. The bones are gone and the pond is empty, but there's one more job to tackle.
Now tell me about this tree over here.
Oh, the tree, right. Do you see where it runs? You didn't.
Oh my God, that's it?
At all. You haven't seen it at all.
That's the tree? Oh my God. That is fantastic. Oh, we gotta get...
helps with the drainage too.
Yeah, right. We gotta get Carol over here to see this before we touch it. God, you weren't kidding when you said it was 20 feet long. Oh, that is totally great.
A bunch of evergreen cones, probably spruce cones spread along.
The students and crew prepared the log for cutting. Removing a section of the 20-foot tree would reveal ancient growth rings.
So I think this tree was in the...
They bound the log with cord to prevent it from splitting apart while they cut it.
Ready? Okay, go ahead, fire it up.
There's a spruce tree that fell over, presumably very close to the time the mastodon skeleton was being buried in this bog. And we've taken a section through it so that if you look at tree rings, the width is controlled by the seasonality.
Okay, that was a great cut. Lots of rings here.
The cut section of the log was so perfectly preserved that it looked almost like it had been cut from a recently living tree.
You actually get a signature of the climate. Are the summers hot? Are the winters cold? That allows you to create a unique system of looking at tree rings back through time. So that's called dendrochronology.
Scientists hope that the prehistoric log will provide insight about conditions in the area 12 to 15,000 years ago. At the very least, its presence in the Logiers Pond will give them information about the warming climate theory, at least for this part of New York. Pine cones found buried with the log and other tree segments identified it as a white spruce. A slowly warming climate over the last 10,000 years or so forced the great ranges of white spruce trees to retreat to the colder regions of Canada. The prehistoric Hyde Park log is from the late Pleistocene era, notes Cornell dendrochronologist Carol Griggs.
It's very well preserved because of the acidic bog, and it's right at the same level with the Mastodon, so it is probably from the same time period. The spruce log contains 134 rings. There's very good growth for many years, and then all of a sudden it gets down to tiny rings that are about a half and maybe a quarter of the size. They will continue, and then it gets back to normal growth as before. So it seems like there's maybe drought coming in a cyclic way. I'm not sure, but this is one tree, so you've got to sort of make guesses at this point.
Growth rings show up in mastodon tusks as well. There's a unique symmetry between tusk cone rings and tree rings. Narrow bands of rings spell stress, difficult times for the animal or the tree, while thicker, more widely spaced rings tell of times when life and conditions were relatively easy. Back in his lab, Fisher cut into a tusk of a mastodon found in Michigan to determine its health and age.
The main reason we cut this tusk was to retrieve a sample that could be used for determining when during the year this animal died. I think we'll get a good sample from this area where we have excellent preservation and a sequence of about 4 or 5 years leading up to the animal's death.
Tusks form continually throughout the mastodon's life, producing a detailed and continuous record, and sometimes providing clues to how the animal died. As the animal ages, the tusk grows and thickens from the base. Inside, a soft, pulpy material expands to push the tusk forward and out. As older cone-shaped layers harden, they form the tusk itself. The oldest section of the tusk is always at the tip of the cone.
This pulp cavity is deep. If I were tall enough, I could put my arm in here up to the shoulder. I can demonstrate it, though, over on this tusk. And you see just how far in I can go. It's interesting that when this tusk was cut, we noticed that here, there, and there, in each of these light-colored regions, were marks made by stone tools. We think these were made by Paleo-Indians butchering this animal and using a tool to disengage and remove some of the soft tissue of this pulp.
There's evidence that Paleo-Indians hunted mastodons and mammoths for food. Did the Hyde Park mastodon fall prey to these efficient hunters? Paleo-Indians are thought to be the descendants of the Ice Age hunters who crossed the Bering Land Bridge 14,000 or more years ago. They have been referred to as Clovis men since the excavation in the 1930s of their spear points among the bones of a mammoth in Clovis, New Mexico. As recently as 40 years ago, the University of Arizona's Paul Martin theorized that mammoths and mastodons could have been hunted to extinction by these men. Some early clues to their deadly skills were found at Greenbush Draw. The draw is a dry riverbed along the Arizona-Mexico border.
At least one mammoth was speared near here 8 times by Clovis hunters 13,000 years ago. Somehow the animal managed to escape, but it died near here and was excavated in Greenbush Draw.
Scientists excavated the draw in the 1950s, revealing this spectacular find, spear points in situ with the remains of a mammoth. These items are now housed at the Arizona State Museum in Tucson. Martin's work hints at the chilling possibility that humans could have wiped out the mastodon in as little as 200 years. But other large animals, like the saber-tooth tiger, also disappeared during this period. Some scientists suggest that the climate caused the extinction, not man. But Dan Fisher disagrees.
As we approach the time of their extinction, these animals are actually maturing at earlier ages and growing their tusks more rapidly than they were before. These changes suggest that they were not really faced with a deteriorating environment. Life was pretty good for them in most respects. These changes are, however, ones that we would expect from an increase in hunting levels. It's too early to say for sure, certainly, but at least in the Great Lakes region, it seems likely that human hunting was the principal cause of their extinction.
In what is now the state of Michigan, as well as elsewhere around the nation, scientists have found extensive evidence of Clovis men having hunted mastodons. There are about 250 mastodon and mammoth sites in the lower peninsula of Michigan. As it happens, this is exactly the distribution of the fluted Clovis spear points scientists also found. They ate well, these prehistoric hunters. From lakes and swamps around Michigan, Dan Fisher has amassed a considerable amount of evidence to prove it.
We've excavated the bones of mammoths and mastodons from the sediments of ancient lakes, very much like this one here. In some cases, we found evidence that lengths of the animal's own intestine were filled with sand and gravel, probably by the Paleo-Indian hunters who had killed the animal. We suspect that this was done so that they could weigh down parts of the carcass on the pond bottom, so it would keep better throughout the winter, spring, and even early summer. Butchery tends to leave characteristic marks on the bones of an animal. This is the skull of a young male mastodon that died about 12,000 years ago when it was just 17 years old. Here across the top of its skull are some quite clear gouges. We think these were probably made by the Paleo-Indian hunters that butchered this animal when they chopped the skin loose from the top of its head, pulling it forward as part of skinning the animal. We're looking here at the thigh bone of a mastodon, and this surface is part of the animal's knee. Over here what we see is a mark made when Paleo-Indians drove a wedge-like object into the space between the two bone surfaces that join at the knee to separate the limb into manageable pieces. And over here we have the left shoulder blade of our 17-year-old mastodon. This projection on the bone is the attachment site for a major mass of muscles. And at butchery sites, this has been broken off as part of the activity that releases some of the meat from the animal. At the Hyde Park site, however, this projection is intact, and there's no comparable damage to the shoulder blades of that animal.
There were no apparent butchery marks on the bones of the Hyde Park mastodon. In fact, Fisher's tusk research hints that at the time the mastodons died out, the climate may have been working in their favor. Of course, besides human predation, there were many other ways for a mastodon to die. Some undoubtedly died of old age. Others may have fallen into swamps or quicksand. Mastodons had few predators, but the prehistoric lions of North America may have made occasional attacks, just as today there are rare instances of African lions attacking elephants. Could climate change and hunting pressures have combined to push the mastodon into an evolutionary brick wall? The answer lies in the bones. Careful examination of the way the bones were deposited can sometimes answer these questions. Eventually, the Hyde Park mastodon will be assembled like this one at the University of Michigan. But first, experts like Amanda Irwin and her professor Narissa Russell will examine its taphonomy.
What taphonomy is it's the study of everything that has happened to the bones from the time the animal dies to the time the bones are eventually recovered. And we're going to be doing a comparison of two different mastodon sites, the Hyde Park site and another site from Chemung County.
Taphonomist Narissa Russell compares the Hyde Park find to the bones from a mastodon found at a site in Chemung County, New York, about 150 miles northwest of Hyde Park. She's looking for evidence of carnivore feeding.
So while we have a Hyde Park bone with no marks whatsoever, on this one from the Chemung animal, we have all these punctures from carnivore teeth, probably a wolf, and a lot of the bone that's just been eaten away. You can see this also on the patella, the kneecap. This is the whole one from Hyde Park, and this is maybe about half with this whole area here and here that have been eaten away by carnivores, leaving their little tooth marks. Parts stayed up for years and were weathered. We may have lost some altogether to weathering. And then the parts that were underneath got trampled by other mastodons and mammoths going through who really kicked them around.
The Hyde Park mastodon, on the other hand, sustained a different type of damage.
The main damage we see there was actually caused by the backhoe as they started to dredge the pond, which left some big scratches and gouges on a couple of the bones.
Each part of the Hyde Park mastodon gives science a unique chance to study the past.
It's one of the best mastodons ever found. Because the skeleton is so complete and so well preserved, it apparently was buried extremely quickly, not disturbed after it was buried, so there was no scavenging, there was no deterioration of the skeleton before it was buried. Because of that, we may be able to learn a great deal more about mastodons in general because of this particular mastodon by using it as a basis for comparison.
The measurements of earlier finds, such as this one, have already been digitized for closer study by computer. The Hyde Park bones may eventually undergo the same process. In the meantime, scientists are working on every fragment retrieved during the dig. More than 90% of the mastodon's skeleton has been recovered. Scientists will eventually be able to provide new information about climate and the animal's nutrition and health. Dan Fisher is processing samples of the mastodon's teeth and tusks for isotopes, or their most basic chemical elements, to paint a picture of how the mastodon lived.
The oxygen isotope signal comes mainly from the animal's drinking water and tells us about local climate, particularly seasonal variation in temperature. Carbon isotopes give us information on the animal's diet, what plants it ate. And nitrogen isotopes tell us more about its diet and also whether the animal was in nutritional stress or not, really what sort of health its health condition was.
Other clues about the climate and environment around Hyde Park will come from core samples taken from the mud at the bottom of the Logier's pond. Some samples were sent to this Vassar lab, where sedimentology professor Jill Schneiderman will be looking at the way the sediments accumulated in the pond.
The sediment core is taken by basically sticking a big tube down through a pile of sediment. And so the bottom of the tube gets the oldest sediment and the top of the tube has the youngest sediment.
This sample shows perhaps as much as 10,000 years of geological history. Scientists have noted a sharp division between the light area, a time when glacial silt was being deposited, and a darker area, which shows when plant material was deposited after the glacier retreated.
We'll be looking at something called the heavy minerals that are contained in the core. These heavy minerals are left behind after glaciers cover the area. So we'll be studying those as well as a clue to where the glacier came from.
Like crime scene detectives, scientists are also sifting through the prehistoric evidence to determine how this mastodon died. Germs, carried by human hunters and their domesticated dogs, could have spelled disaster for all mastodons. One vast continent-wide pandemic could have wiped out the species. Was there an outbreak? Cornell geneticists hope to answer that by locating some form of the mastodon's DNA in the excavated materials. Professor Charles Aquadro maintains it's a challenging proposition when material has been exposed to nature for more than 10,000 years.
The challenge we face in getting DNA from the Hyde Park mastodon is that which is faced with any other analysis of ancient DNA. There is bacteria, fungi, other things that contribute to breaking down that DNA, as well as just simply exposure to water and other chemicals in the environment.
Raging fire left a mark in the pond as well, providing scientific evidence that thousands of years could not hide.
This piece of charcoal right here was actually found right in with the bones of the Hyde Park mastodon. Tells us that indeed, yes, there was fire occurring at the Hyde Park mastodon site.
Could fire have driven the Hyde Park mastodon from the trees to its death in the Logiers pond? Scientists are still unsure about what might have happened. They do know that the 208 bones and tusks found there reveal that the mastodon was male. It was about 37 years old, near the end of its lifespan of about 50 years.
The teeth are very worn. The spinal column shows evidence of bone disease. This was an old animal. So I think that has to be taken into account when you're talking about cause of death. Maybe it wandered out on what it thought was firm ground 11,500 years ago, fell through the ice, and couldn't get out.
Science is still hard at work attempting to uncover exactly how the mastodon died. Meanwhile, its skeleton will continue to contribute to our understanding of North America's Pleistocene era for decades to come. We're fortunate that Larry and Cheryl Logier saw fit to share with the public and the scientific community what they found in their backyard. The pond is now back to normal, minus its prehistoric secret. It's a secret that neighborhoods throughout America may also share. No matter where you live, the next time you're mowing your lawn, shooting hoops, or puttering in the garden, there's good reason to wonder. Is there a mastodon buried in your backyard?